It's not every day that a game like this comes along with a certain artistic flair to it. Something that goes above and beyond to just give you a fun experience, but also provides deeper themes, something that's rooted in humanity and politics. In this case, it does explore a whole host of different human experiences, one of them being grief and the challenge of dealing with grief in all forms and all sorts of areas, all expressed through the various characters. But I will say, as a game, it's definitely not for everyone. It's certainly something that is an acquired taste, and it requires a lot of effort from the player to get through in order to get everything that the director and his team have so lovingly crafted, while also being bombastic with a lot of flair and campiness would be the familiar term that people would like to use. So, what is Death Stranding 2? Death Stranding 2 follows the protagonist from the original game, created by Kojima and his team, Kojima Productions. You follow Sam as he's now, just like in the first game where he was having to reconnect America, he's now tasked to reconnect Mexico and then Australia to a whole new chiral network. And I don't really want to say much else that would spoil the experience. You obviously have a lot of the original cast from the first games that you will be familiar with, such as Deadman, Hartman, Fragile, that'll follow you on this experience. And then you'll have some of the newcomers, such as Tarman and Dollman, that all add even more depth and complexity to this world and add a lot of heart and soul to the world of Death Stranding, as well as Sam and his character as he's going on his journey that incorporates a big part of the grief that he will experience. And of course, the main villain, being Higgs, is back for more mischief and more psychological trauma and playfulness brought on by Troy Baker himself, who plays an immaculate performance here. He has far more center stage in this game, and I think he just outshines a lot of the performances. All the cast put on a great performance, but Troy just really brings his character of Higgs to the next level. It's quite impressive to watch. The gameplay obviously plays very much like the first game. It is essentially a delivery simulator, if you want to call it. You're tasked with delivering either packages, utilities, technology, whatever it may be, from one location to another. You even have animals that you might even have to uncover, find, rescue, and deliver as well. So there's a lot of the general mechanics from the first game that obviously return, but the big improvement comes in the form of combat, where combat is no longer just a means to get away from the mules from the first game. You actually have a little bit more engagement and involvement in combat and in stealth. So a lot of the scenarios that you will encounter will actually have better designed locations, far more industrial kind of locales and buildings that you can sneak behind, hide inside. You've got a lot more tools available to you to deal with the various enemies, ranging from, you have your standard grenades, but you also have a lot of fun new playful tools like BT grenades that'll scare some of the enemies away or just have them cower in fear. You'll have holographic kind of grenades that'll also encourage them to inspect things like a kangaroo. And then you've got the whole host of other guns and stuff, which all play surprisingly non-lethal this time. There isn't such a big focus on lethality in this game. So all the weapons will essentially not do any kill damage to an enemy, so that you don't have the same mechanic as the first game where you're having to worry about if someone dies, you need to dispose of their body or their corpse so that they don't void out, which is essentially an explosion that would typically happen in this world. So it is kind of sad that some of that challenge is removed. But speaking of challenge, the game is overall a much smoother and easier experience, along with the improvements to the vehicles, which are used for traversal, and the fact that there are a few more other ways to traverse the environment, not just with cars on the roads that you can build, but also the monorails that you can build in order to traverse around other parts of the map. But with that said, a lot of the map is actually structured in a far more forgiving way compared to the first game. On top of the fact that the vehicles themselves have been vastly improved and have better control, they also give you a lot more flexibility in what you can do. So you can actually just, specifically would say the truck, you can actually set up guns on the truck that allow you to just pick up packages on the go. And then with an upgrade for your glove, you can just pick up your your chiralium crystals directly from the truck without even getting out. So there's a lot of easy conveniences where there isn't the getting on and off the actual vehicle. It's a lot more streamlined. But that said, when you start exploring the map, you quickly realize that the map itself hasn't really been designed to offer any challenges against the vehicles themselves. So it ends up becoming very much a sure thing to just drive through the whole of Australia, which is your main map that you'll spend the vast majority of the campaign on. And it's kind of sad. There really isn't much usefulness for some of the walking tools that allow you to traverse either the mountain ranges with the Boca skeleton or the speed skeleton that allows you to traverse long distances quite faster, which is unfortunate. Compared to the first game, I think the first game did a better job with providing a lot more challenge and a lot more variety. It encouraged you to utilize the different tools at the right moment. In that sense, it is a far more streamlined game, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's easier in certain aspects. And I think a lot of the challenge is far more focused around the general moment-to-moment combat that's here on offer, which again is vastly improved. The AI is tough. I wouldn't say it's any tougher than the first game, but because of the fact that there's a wider variety of enemies and tools that they have available to them, it therefore adds a few extra layers of challenge to what you may encounter, what you have to deal with. So on top of the various human factions that you have, you also have mechs that you fight against. And they're a lot tougher. They're not as easy as the human foes. You can't just snipe them from a distance or knock them out quickly. They are very much a threat, and they can be a threat that exists in the world at the very end, up to the end of the game, should you choose to play with that mechanic, is entirely up to you. Graphics in this game, really just the way Decima kind of outshines itself as an engine is sublime. It is beautiful. There's so much detail in the environment. Not always amazing. I must admit, on the PS5, I was playing it in quality mode. So obviously it runs at 30 frames a second. And you can see, if you look far into the distance, you can see that the detail does drop. But overall, the weather and the different various effects in the landscape that you are traversing look beautiful. I will say, when it comes to weather in this game, that was the one disappointment that I had. The types of environmental effects that are there to play as an antagonist to the character, because it's not just about dealing with your enemies or your BTs. There's also the environment to account for when you're traversing from location to location, when you're making your deliveries. And when you're playing it through a first time and you get those fun experiences of dealing with a sandstorm or dealing with an array of comets that are flying down and burning a whole forest, it is beautiful. It's breathtaking. It feels impactful and tense. But then when you start going back and doing just regular orders, it feels like a lot of those mechanics are just stripped away and you don't really get to notice much of it, or it really doesn't affect the rest of the moment to moment experience apart from very highlighted missions. And it's kind of an unfortunate circumstance that it, for me, shows that the developers didn't necessarily go out of their way to infuse those mechanics into the game in a deeper sense. You do still have flooding. You will see notifications that there are earthquakes, but for the most part, when you're doing your general orders that are helping you increase the star ratings for each of the bases, you don't get any of those extra challenges that add to your deliveries. It's just the standard BTs and the mules or the terrorist factions that you have to deal with. It is disappointing that it lacks some of the further depth that could have existed mechanically and could have been, it could have existed within the actual ecosystem of the game. Yes, there's a lot there in the game, and the moment to moment sections of the game play out really well. I think the story bits, or the major story bits, aside from a handful of memorable boss battles, there probably isn't the same quantity and quality of bosses that you might find in other previous Kojima games, probably more akin to like Metal Gear Solid 2 or 3, that have a far wider gamut and variety of the types of bosses that you fight here. Yes, there are a variety of BTs, some that are returning from the original game, but there are a lot of new additions into this game. There are certainly a handful of unique bosses that have been created specifically for this game. But there was one particular boss battle that does technically get repeated 2 or 3 times. They just kind of tweak how he's structured so that you might fight him in a different type of location, or the focus on how you fight him is slightly twisted and changed. So I would say there isn't the same variety to the bosses that you will encounter throughout the course of the game. That said, what you do get to experience, the kind of moment to moment experiences that you have, there are some gorgeous set pieces and there are some very special moments. For those who are familiar with the first game that had the combats with Clifford Unger, which was played by Mads Mikkelsen in the original game, there are similar moments here, and I will say there is one in particular that really outshines itself in a few moments. There's probably two. I would say, yeah, there are two levels of a similar kind of ilk in this game. But again, I won't dwell too much on the story because it is one of those things that I think is best experienced. I will say that I do have some criticisms about the pacing of what the main character is kind of going through. There is an emotional beat that plays a big part throughout this whole game. And I don't think it's expressed enough throughout the course of the beginning to the middle of the game, and is not really a big part until the very last 3 to 5 hours of the experience. And it's one of those things that when you get to the end, it all kind of comes together and it works and it makes sense. But I do kind of feel that Kojima could have done a bit more to add a little bit more emphasis to your so-called companion that goes on the journey with you. And I feel like there could have been a lot more of a connective tissue from a gameplay standpoint. It's there, but it's not as prominent as it was in the original. But I won't go into too much detail other than that. So, is it worth a damn? Well, that really depends. If you're someone who likes the kind of experience that you get from, say, a power wash simulator and can see themselves, say, doing 2 or 3 power wash simulator missions to then get a story beat and then repeat that kind of cycle again and again with a few other varied action moments. This game plays in a similar ilk. You will have to do 1 or 2 deliveries and then you'll get a story beat, and then you'll do another 1 or 2 deliveries and then you'll get a story beat, and it piecemeals the story throughout the whole experience until you get the overarching narrative and gives you the conclusion and the climax that you're kind of looking for. It's a really well told detective tale to some degree, while also sort of, I wouldn't even call it a revenge story because it doesn't really follow a revenge plot in a generic standpoint, which is quite admirable for what the character is dealing with. But is it worth a damn for you? Again, if you're wanting that slow paced mechanical kind of game with moments of action, and you're far more interested in a really deep narrative that has a lot of campiness and wackiness because it doesn't always stay serious, it actually breaks the seriousness quite often, you will have a fucking phenomenal time, and it's definitely worth every dollar. But if you find the idea of having to deliver another package and drive from one location to another, and sometimes even driving back through old locations because the game tells you to do that quite a few times just so you can get the next story beat, don't buy it. It's definitely not for you. It will probably bore the shit out of most people who do not have that level of patience, and that is fine. It is not your kind of game, and I understand. But if you do, and you stick with it to the end, it will give you something that is so enriching and so unique that I mean, you can probably even see it on my stream at the very end. I bawled my eyes out, and it was such an emotional experience, and it had its final payoff really deliver something that I didn't even see coming. So I was very impressed for something that you could probably spot certain things a mile away, and then other things you won't even figure out until the very end. Maybe that's spoiling too much, but I just think it's worth a damn, at least for my kind of taste and sensibility. Give it a shot. Again, if you don't like the idea of the gameplay, don't worry about it. Don't try it. Don't even think about it. Even if you want, watch a synopsis or watch some gameplay. It's worth playing. I think that's the tricky part with Kojima. The gameplay itself is good, and I think it could be better. It certainly can be better. But the story here is sublime, and the story here is what you want to play through. I don't think that this is his best game. I think he's done a lot better, and I think the mechanics are still good, but I don't think he's played enough with what's there. And when I look at something like Nintendo's Pikmin that offer very simple mechanics but add extra depth and extra layers to those mechanics and challenge you throughout the whole experience. Maybe that's kind of the point, that the moment-to-moment story needs to be simple enough for most people to get until maybe the end game. But it is unfortunate that it almost doesn't really kind of evenly give you varied gameplay. Even in some of its side quests, they are still very stock standard and generic and don't offer much in the way of variety to what is on show. But check it out, see what you think. If it's of your ilk, I think it's worth a damn. Tell me what your thoughts are. Share your thoughts and feelings on the channel. You'll find me on Jake Starvik, here on YouTube and Twitch. And I look forward to hearing from you guys.